Salvete discipuli. Here we're going to continue our discussion of the dative case, and specifically in those cases when the dative and the ablative endings are identical, how are we going to know if our word is a dative indirect object that we need to translate as to or for, or if it's one of those uses of the ablative that do not take a preposition, such as the ablative of means or the ablative of time or the ablative of manner, so that we can translate those with the appropriate prepositions. Because both the dative and the ablative cases frequently do not use a preposition and sometimes have identical endings, here in the first declension plural, completely identical in the second declension, and then once again in the third declension plural, all of these endings are identical, and so we need to know how we're going to translate them in the English and making sure that we have the right preposition, because if the word is dative, we're going to translate it as to or for, but if the word is ablative, we're likely going to translate it with the preposition with instead. So disciply, anytime you see a word that could be dative or could be ablative, that it has one of those shared endings, here's a 4-step process to really help guide you in figuring out which case it is so that you can translate it correctly. The first thing you want to ask yourself is there a preposition? If there is a preposition, that is one of those SID space preposition uses, and it absolutely has to be ablative because the dative case will never use a preposition. And then if you identify a preposition, it's a SID space use, just translate that preposition and then the word accordingly. If there is not a preposition, however, we're still left in this in-between stage where we don't know if it's dative or ablative, so we need to go on to question number 2. Does the noun refer to a person? If there is no preposition, and if the noun refers to a person or some other type of creature that can think and act for itself, think horses, not slugs, then it's likely to be a dative indirect object to or for that noun. If it is referring to a thing or something that can't think or act for itself, then it's likely to be an ablative, and we'll translate that with a with. Discipuli, let's go through this process. Here I have a sentence, Cornelius canem puero dedit, and here I've got my word puero with that O ending from second declension. This could be dative, it could be ablative. So let's go through those questions. The first one, is there a preposition? Not a preposition, so we need to go on to step 2 because this word can still be dative or ablative. And if we ask, is puero referring to a person? The answer becomes yes, which means that this is most likely to be a dative, and our subject, Cornelius, is going to be verbing our direct object to or for the boy. So Cornelius gave a dog to the boy. Just a quick note that the word order is not going to change anything. Remember that it's not the word order in Latin that gives meaning to a sentence, it's the ending. And since we still have the exact same endings, canem is still our direct object, puero is still our dative, and we still have our main verb of dated. Go ahead and try this one out, disciply. Go through that process and identify, do you think bakulo is referring to a dative indirect object, or is it an ablative use? Pause the video and then we'll go through the answer. Once again, disciply, canem is very clearly our accusative direct object, and here we see bakulo. There's no preposition, so we go on to the second step, which is, does it refer to a person or a thing? Since bakulo refers to a stick, this means that this use is likely to be an ablative use, and it's going to be an ablative of means that will translate as with. So this sentence, as an ablative use, means he beats our dog with a stick. Me Hercule eheu. Pause the video as you try to figure out whether or not uxori is a dative or an ablative use. As we look at this sentence, Cornelius is our subject, fabulam is our accusative direct object of our verb, and we have the word uxori. And since there is no preposition, we need to go on to our second step, whether or not it refers to a person. Because it refers to a person, this word is most likely dative or indirect object to mean Cornelius told the story to his wife, or alternatively, Cornelius told his wife the story. Now, ironically, there is another way to tell if this is dative or ablative. Uxori is one of those third declension words, and in the singular, there's absolutely no ambiguity between the dative and the ablative case. There's only really one option for uxori. It has to be dative. With all of these sentences that were dative as well, another clue that we have is our verb. Our verb was one that is one of our saying verbs, or giving verbs, or doing verbs that typically indicate an indirect object. So when in doubt, you can also look at the verb to give you an additional clue. Can you actually expect a dative in this sentence, or does it just not make sense in the context? Now there is one thing to take note of that we haven't discussed yet. We're going to be discussing this a little bit more closely in another video, and that is this verb apropinquo, apropinquare, apropinquavi, to approach. This verb in particular, you'll notice in your readings, will take a dative case word after it. And even though this dative is going to refer to a thing, it is still a dative case. And that's just because this particular verb requires a use of the dative. We'll talk about why that is in a later video, but let's just give you an example so that you can anticipate it in your readings. Iam urbi apropinquavat. They were approaching the city. And even though city is a thing, this word is still very clearly in the dative case, because otherwise it would be urbe with an ablative ending. So as you're reading, watch out in particular for this specific verb, and we'll talk about apropinquo and its use with the dative in another video. Otherwise, that's all for now. You guys should now be able to identify whether a word that is ambiguous is in the dative case or the ablative case. Walete discipuli.